national anthems. Some are more memorable than others, some are sung more than others, and some don't even have words. Some are uplifting, and others are, well... We're going to talk about anthems, and we're going to talk about, why they exist, how they are different around the world. The thing is, though, I will freely admit I have caught the bubonic plague from my child's daycare, which means that I am about 10 seconds from death at any point in time, and definitely not being melodramatic about it. So if I sound a bit odd and a little less flowy, well, that's the reason why, because I've stopped to sneeze halfway through it. On anthems, everyone's heard God Save the King, right? What about Hail Derim Siegerkranz? Or God Save the Tsar? Or Oben am Jungen Rhein? Well, it's all the same tune. You'll never guess this. Well, maybe you probably will. You're all pretty well nerds like I am if you clicked on a video about national anthems. But they are all the same tune, and for the most part, the message is relatively the same. On the flip side, for anthems of this part of the world, well, they're all about Allah and how He is great. Similarly, below this line, most of the anthems include themes of colonization. See, the thing about national anthems is that they are symbols of nationhood, and what makes them special is the very idea of the nation and what it means to whoever is listening to them. One's identification with one's own anthem and supports for its own interest furthers the idea that you are not but a subject, but a citizen of your nation. And in a sense, this is one of the most purest forms of nationalism, and this really begins to exist in the modern era around the time of the French Revolution. I mentioned that I was doing this video on anthems, and we had a comment under the, I think it's the 1812 video, about national anthems, and I'm really asking where they come from. In a sense, the national anthem that we recognise and that we sing and that we would call an anthem today in our modern understanding of it comes from, well, the 1700s, the French Revolution, and that beginning of the formation of the idea of the nation state and nationhood and the citizen. And that's where the anthem that we understand it comes from. But the oldest anthem in the world is actually the Japanese one. Now, the Japanese anthem is very peaceful, it's very uplifting. I can't pronounce the name of it, so I'll put it on screen. But it is probably the oldest anthem. It's the oldest anthem that we have recorded on Earth, and it is genuinely absolutely beautiful. And you can almost hear a melodic hymn to it. And for the most part, European anthems begin the same way. They are hymns. So like God Save the King, it is a hymn at the end of the day. And you have other songs that wouldn't be necessarily considered national anthems today, or we wouldn't consider them national anthems, but they follow that similar formula where it's a hymn. So that's where national anthems get their birth from. Back to what we're talking about nationalism. Today when we hear the word nationalist, it has quite a few negative connotations surrounding it. And there is a simple reason for this, and it's extremist and fringe ideology groups. And they often have, and they will continue to do this, where they take a symbol and an ideal that will resonate with people, such as a national anthem, a song, or a symbol, and they will pervert it to fit their agenda, to become synonymous with their agenda. I mean, there is a reason why communists have absolute bangers for songs. I mean, listen to this one. That sounds great. I love that song. I don't like communism, but I like that song. Having very powerful music means that they will have strong resonation with the people. So as an example here that's probably a bit more personal, I'm an Australian. For whatever reason, so many people think I'm British. Naturally being an Aussie, and from being from Queensland, the best part of Australia and the best part of the world, fight me. I must take this opportunity to laugh at New South Wales for Game 2 in Origin 2023. That was just abysmal, guys. Come on, I know you're at Suncorp, but come on. But, just before the game, when both teams are lined up, and the anthem is playing and the flag's waving in the background, it does feel kind of nice. It feels quite prideful. And again, in its purest sense, that is nationalism and national identity. So nationalism, like I said, it's not all red and black flags with spicy pinwheels and funny hats and death camps, no. That is a perversion of the idea. The Nordic countries are great examples here. They are left-leaning social democracies, and they are viciously nationalist, especially the Finnish. They are proud of who they are, and they love their nation, and they rally around their symbols of nationhood to defend its very existence. Now, what does that have to do with anthems? Yes, well, I'm getting to it. The Finnish anthem, it is a reflection of this pride and this idealist belief that the nation and the people must always be vigilant and ready to defend themselves against aggression. The lyrics to their anthem, again, I can't pronounce it, but I believe it's called Mami, or Mami. I don't speak Finnish, okay? I just don't. But the lyrics, as an excerpt from it, are, "And here it was their blood was shed, for us here on this shore, and it was here their joys were bred, here their sighs were heaved and fled, that peoples who our burdens bore before us long before." So it's a call back to their ancestry, and the fact that they've had to fight for their very existence, where they live, what they believe in, their land, their love. So that's where you get the idea. It's a very nationalist song. However, you wouldn't call the Finns necessarily, well, the kind of nationalists that you'd see on the news. Again, fringe politics perverts the idea of nationalism. It does it quite heavily, and it does work it on both sides. I mean, communist countries are very nationalist, although they claim to be internationalist, and, worldwide revolution and such. The sheer amount of there's no better word for it, bigotry, and I'm better than you because I'm from this country that communist nations had, is absolutely insane. There's a reason why in 1928, when Stalin comes to power, you start to see a very heavy obsession with the idea of Russification and Rus peoples being number one. I mean, the Soviet anthem in itself says that. The mighty Rus, basically, and led by Moscow. It's very nationalist in its idea. And again, it's that fringe politics perversion of nationalisms for their nation above all else. And yes, the general gist of nationalism is to put your nation first, and it can be at the expense of others, but the idea of fringe politics here and fringe ideologues here is they pervert that idea further to get particularly violent about it. Like when you look at the Swedes, for example. The Swedes aren't out here being one of the most nationalist people in the world saying, alright, well, to be Swedish, we must kill every single person around us. No, they're not. It's basically a case of don't touch me, leave me alone. The Bahamas, for example. Well, its anthem is one of the most chill things ever, and honestly, I could be sitting on the beach drinking rum out of a coconut listening to this thing, and I would probably not peg it as an anthem. It is a beautiful song, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to insult it here, but it is, it's quite relaxing, and it is a very good reflection of the Caribbean paradise, at least geographically, that the Bahamians call home. So, have a listen. March on to glory, your bright banners waving high. On the contrary, countries with a much more martial history, with revolution and such, like the French, have a bit of bloodlust in their anthem. And originally La Marseillaise, if you time it, it's aux armes, citoyens, formez, or bataillon. Again, my French is not great, but it times in beat with a march. It is a march, fundamentally. It is calling people to march together to kill the impure. It is very much a revolutionary song designed for a crowd of people, which is why it's so strong. And the symbols of the nation are fundamentally built around that change from the French Revolution in the 1700s. And really, the idea of the nation that we have today started. And this isn't to say that countries or nations didn't exist prior to the revolution in France. They did. However, it's more how people see themselves, and the symbols and songs are vital to this change from subject to citizen in one's own mind. Especially when you realize just how illiterate populations were at the time. I'm not even kidding. Most people could not read or write, but they could sing, they could speak, and they could see things. So if they saw, for example, the cockade, a red, white, and blue circular cockade on someone's hat, and that person was singing La Marseillaise, and they were talking about, well, I'm against the monarchy, I'm all for your rights, freedom, liberty, bread, it's going to resonate with someone. And it's going, even if they can't read or write, they're going to start thinking, hey, this is pretty good. And it's very catchy. That's a very catchy song. So it all starts to catch up. And you have this idea of the nation and the citizen, not the subject, forming. Well, remember how I said before that a lot of countries have the same anthem, like the United Kingdom, Russia, and Prussia, or later Germany. And they're all monarchies, and it's all a derivative of God Save the King, God Save the Tsar, God Hail Sieger Crowns, it varies. It's a song all about the monarchy. And this is very much, again, due to that unifying factor. And as an attempt to stop revolutionary spread throughout the liberal uprisings of 1848, these songs take on a different meaning. And by using music and the same ideas that the French have of nation and symbols of nation, they're able to intertwine their monarchies with the people. This works to an extent in Germany, but, World War I happens and the Kaiser Wilhelm II's a fucking idiot. And in Russia, it kind of ends, red. Very, very red. However, in Britain, it worked out great. And it's incredibly effective even to this day. And we see that in the outpouring of support and love that the late Queen Elizabeth II had. And it comes from the fact that she was intertwined with her people. She was a lot of people's just grandmother. She was a beacon of stability and strength, and she didn't waver from it. And that became intertwined with the people, just like her father in the Second World War. So when God Save the King is sung in Britain, it means a lot more than just, for example, saying, oh yes, the king, the queen, yes, love them so much. No, it's the people. And the sovereign is a representation of those people to a large extent. That's the idea of it behind whether you feel about that personally, or whatever, you might not agree, but that's the idea of it at least. The unifying power of a song, though, while it can benefit a government, like I was talking about Britain and the monarchy, it can actually rally people and come to bite them in the arse. A great example here are the 2014 Euromaidan protests, and this included a continuous crowd singing the national anthem of Ukraine over and over and over. And this excerpt during a Berkut police operation to remove the protesters from Maidan, often called the darkest night of Euromaidan by the protesters, shows just how powerful a crowd can be united behind their national anthem and their national identity. And they will happily take bullets and fight the police because they are so united behind that identity. Power of an anthem at war, it really cannot be understated, and whether it's internal struggle or external struggle. Probably the most powerful rendition of an anthem I can genuinely think of, and I've ever heard, would be this one.
Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła. Niech żyje Polska.
This is a Polish radio station in 1939 asking if anyone can hear them after Warsaw is about to fall, and then vowing that Poland would never surrender and would fight on and never be truly lost. Playing their national anthem after this, which itself is entitled Poland is Not Yet Lost. It is so very poignant, and it can be quite emotional, particularly for older Poles to watch and hear this, because they may have heard it in person, but it also, we know what happens next during the Second World War. And this is very much a symbol of that Polish fuck off Germany attitude that they had. And I will probably make videos talking about 303 Squadron, those absolute mad lads. They deserve a video on themselves. Or just the fact that the Free Poles were absolute nutcases and just brilliant fighters. Quite a few actually moved to Australia after the war. I was lucky enough to work with the granddaughter of a Polish veteran from the British Army during the Second World War for quite a few years. And they are fiercely proud of their Polish heritage and their name and their culture. So it's not just your national anthem. Quite often they can have an effect in war, or the country at war's national anthem. Some countries have had anthems that have grown to truly be symbols around the world. I want you to imagine that for just a moment. You are a Russian. You're about 19 years old, and your entire life you have been told by your government that the US is out to get you. And I'm not kidding, that is genuinely the propaganda here that they receive from day dot. I want to point out something here, and this is going to be something that a lot of you are going to get very upset about, and I don't give a fuck. Putin has been in power for over 20 years. Most of the Vatniks and the Z people on the internet are younger than Putin's reign. They have only been alive when Putin is there. And during that time, our governments in the West have been somewhat stupid about certain things. And when your government is stupid, what do the youth do? They look for an alternative. and that alternative is more than happy to constantly put out propaganda saying that they are better. For example, there is a renaissance in a way of very zealoty Christians amongst Generation Z. They will constantly refer to Russia as a beacon of liberty and Christianity. I would like to point out one of the reasons they do this is based on abortion rates. There are more abortions per capita in the Russian Federation than there are anywhere else on Earth. However, the country will constantly chest thump itself saying how religiously beautiful it is and how Christian it is, and it will continue to get these people to follow it, because they're idiots and they don't bother to look past the headline. Yes, this is going to upset quite a few people. No, I don't care. I really don't care. You already think I'm a CIA plot. I mean, at least Langley could do is pay me more. But anyway, you're that 19-year-old Russian, and I base this off actually being to Russia. I have been there, so I kind of know probably better than you who have never left California once in your life, but you're just a bit edgy. When I was there, I noticed that there are gigantic posters, and there is so much reverence of the president. Like, he's even on fridge magnets. Like, he is everywhere. You can't go anywhere without seeing that stupid potato's face. And he constantly has fed people that lie that everyone in the West wants to kill Russia. But again, this is going to upset a lot of people, but that is the brutal honesty here. They have been fed the propaganda that we hate them, so they have pretty much written their own destiny. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. But you're 19 and you have listened to that propaganda your whole life. It's all you have heard. You've only known one leader. And then you invade Ukraine, and you can hear the Star-Spangled Banner playing on that radio. I personally would shit myself a little bit at the very idea that the Star-Spangled Banner was blaring through my radio. It would be kind of disconcerting, because the Star-Spangled Banner, whether you like it or not, and although it's a song about a battle with the British, it has grown to be synonymous with that very Western ideal of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is a representation of the exact ideals that the US Constitution is founded on. And again, I don't care if you're going to say that the US is not like this today, it's been perverted, yeah, whatever, I don't care. That's the idea behind the anthem, and that's the symbology of the anthem. We're not talking about what the modern US is like, we're talking about symbology.
Post-production and even more sick history of everything here. I had a question on the last video about where the US national anthem comes from, and the Star-Spangled Banner as we all know it. And originally you might find this hard to believe, but the US did not actually have a national anthem up until just before the Second World War. And the Star-Spangled Banner was in effect a national anthem, but it was not official, and it was made very much non-officially the anthem by the US Navy adopting it, but also sporting games adopting it. And it very quickly became a symbol that people would resonate with and that people believed in. So that's why the Star-Spangled Banner is the US national anthem.
Anthems are also really good at helping a new country or government draw legitimacy as a successor to a previous one. Now, if I play the next few bars to this song, well, national anthem, I guarantee you will recognize it. But if I play this, I bet you won't. The best example of an old anthem being used to garner legitimacy would 100% be the Russian Federation. The current anthem of Russia is identical to the Soviet Union's in its sound. The lyrics, however, were changed, but the overall gist remains the same. Now, this was not always the case, and when Russia came into existence after the fall of the Soviet Union, the anthem was new and it was different. But as with all things Russia in the 90s, it became somewhat synonymous with pain, pickled spinach, and misery. So when the anthem was changed back to the older one, it did harken back to a period, at least, where Russia was stronger and provided with a tremendous amount of legitimacy to the new president, being Vladimir Putin. Anthems can mean quite a lot to displaced people too. The scene in the film Casablanca hits particularly hard when you understand the context of what's going on, and that the people in the room were there having fled occupied France. The sheer power of that old French revolutionary song turned anthem genuinely moved the cast to tears. This is not scripted. The cast are genuinely crying here because of the fact that they are French and what has happened. And the simple fact was they didn't know if they would ever get to see their home again or get to see their country be free again. So when they hear them, I say, yeah, it genuinely is an emotional moment. And this is probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest moments in filmmaking history. And it shows just the sheer power of a national anthem and what it can do. Amongst the expat community of Afghanistan, for example, in a modern context, I expect the Republic's old anthem will grow alongside the black, red, and green tricolour to be a rallying symbol of people living abroad. My favourite restaurant in Canberra, for example, in Australia, proudly displays their flag. Or at least it did last time I was there. And if you're wondering, bar my arm, in Brighton, if you're ever in Canberra, best restaurant, honestly, it's up there. It's so good. And the South Vietnamese expats in Australia, for example, who are a very big part of our community and our society, do the exact same thing with their symbols of nation state. If you ever go to a Vietnamese restaurant, odds are, in Australia, you will probably see the yellow flag with 3 red stripes on it, the South Vietnamese flag. And they will quite often be called something related to South Vietnam. So, for example, Saigon pork roll. It's called Ho Chi Minh City now in Vietnam because it was renamed after the war, but the expats still will use the old terminology, Saigon, and the old flag. And you won't usually hear the anthem unless you recognise, but I have heard it played in a couple of restaurants, so it could vary. So what was the purpose of this video? Was it to reveal to the world that I have a problem and that I listen to national anthems for fun because I am weird? No. Why would you say that? Okay, it was a little bit, but it was mostly to talk about nationalism, and the fact that nationalism in its purest form is not some fringe politics. It's a little more complicated than that.